This is the Metal Gateway Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome to the final episode of the inaugural season of the Metal Gateway Podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode, but also thanks to all of you who have listened to these interviews for the past 10 weeks. It means so much to me that so many people care about these stories. Enough gratitude for now, let's get on with the show. If you're into doom metal, unless you've been hiding under a rock for the past 20 years, you know what an influence the band SubRosa had on metal music. My guest on the show this week is none other than Rebecca Vernon, the founder and frontwoman of SubRosa. On the off chance that you're not familiar with SubRosa, here's a taste. This is Borrowed Time, Borrowed Eyes off of SubRosa's 2011 album, No Help for the Mighty Ones.
Give me
SubRosa split up a few years ago, and in the years since, Rebecca has been hard at work on a new project called The Keening. A couple of months after this interview was recorded, she and I were at a show talking about the band, and she described The Keening as being metal adjacent, and that initially she was concerned that the metal community wouldn't embrace it, but I can assure you, having seen this band perform live 3 times now, it's exactly the kind of music that metalheads embrace. It's dark, it's moody, it's emotional, and it treads on some musical ground that feels both familiar to a metal sensibility and the legacy of her work in SubRosa, while also feeling completely original. While I'm at it, actually, why not? Let's hear a clip from that album as well. This is Autumn, off of the Keening's debut album, Little Bird, released in October of last year. In a relatively short time, the Keening has accomplished a lot. In the past 12 months alone, this band has released its debut album, Little Bird, on Relapse Records. They've played their first ever live shows, including gigs with bands like Agalloch. The band was one of the featured artists at the Decibel Metal and Beer Festival in Denver this past December. Rebecca and the band are currently touring Europe with Bell Witch, and this summer will be touring coast to coast in North America with Pallbearer and Inter Arma. I'll include a link to that tour in the show notes so you can check it out. On last week's episode, Charlie Anderson from Panopticon told us how SubRosa was the first band that showed him that as a violinist, he had a place in heavy metal music. And this week, I'm interviewing the woman who started that band, and she tells us how the violin was there in the music of SubRosa from the very beginning. Heavy metal is a small world in many ways, and I just love it when I can make connections like this. It's really special. Anyway, for this week's episode, Rebecca and I sat down, and she told me about her uncool beginnings, her words, not mine, in the alternative music scene in Utah, where she spent her teenage years and her early adulthood, and how that led to the formation of SubRosa and the work she's doing today. We talked about a lot of other things, including ska, the surprisingly vibrant goth scene in Salt Lake City. We talked about how she first became a drummer and later how she stepped out from behind the kit and picked up the guitar and fronted a band for the first time. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks for listening. Rebecca Vernon, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you for, giving me your time today and having this conversation. I'm really excited to hear your story. Rebecca, what was your gateway to metal? How did you become a metalhead? How did this, crazy subculture come to inhabit your life?
So the first album I bought was Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. I was 12 years old. So that is how I got into metal. I just started listening. I found out I was exposed to Guns N' Roses through the radio and MTV, those were the only really avenues back in 1988,
Yeah.
And that's how I first started listening to metal.
And where did you grow up? Where were you at that time? Like,
I was in San Antonio, Texas.
Oh, okay. So, probably like lots of different musical things happening in that town at that point in time. And
maybe, but I wasn't aware of it because
Right.
I was in middle school. I was 12. And so, I don't think I even went to my first concert till I was 14. So, yeah.
So how did you discover that album? I mean, when you heard it on the radio, you said, but like, how did you what was the process? Did you go buy it? Like, did you go into the record store? Like, what was that like? Tell me about that. Do you remember that really well?
I cannot remember exactly how I bought that album. I cannot remember how I did it. I must have bought it at a record store.
Yeah.
And I can't, I lived on an Air Force base with my family. And so they must have driven me to a store at some point to get it, but I can't remember. Yeah, but my favorite song was Sweet Child of Mine, and I remember watching the MTV Video Awards that year and following, hoping that it would make number one and watching it for hours. And then, it was number one and I was so excited. I remember running around the house, jumping off furniture. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What was it like for you, at age 12 to discover that and where did it go from there? Did that trigger something in you that did it inspire a curiosity or something? What was it? Where'd it go?
So I started following all glam metal bands. I started, of course, listening to all the big ones like Poison and Bon Jovi and Def Leppard and Cinderella and Monster Ballads and Motley Crue, and I started listening to lots of different metal, glam metal in that way. And I guess I would listen to it again from the radio. And I watched a ton of music videos. I watched MTV a lot. And so that's kind of how I got exposed to more metal. So it wasn't just Guns N' Roses. It was kind of the whole glam metal movement. It was kind of short-lived though. After middle school, when I moved, I don't know what happened. The glam metal movement was kind of dying down on the mainstream level.
Yeah.
And I just kind of went through a period where I didn't listen to much music for a couple years.
Really?
And my whole life has been like that. I'll have these bursts of, interest, and then I'll kind of withdraw for a while, and then I'll come back, and it happens. Yeah, like almost like clockwork.
Yeah. Well, is there like, can you predict when it's going to happen? I mean, is it like a natural cycle? Is it a predictable cycle? Is it a regular cycle? Does it happen on every couple of years or?
Not really. It's not really that predictable. I don't know. I'll just go through this period where sometimes it's when something like kind of traumatic happens with music, and I'll just think, do I really want to be doing this? And I'll kind of step away for a while. And there are just those times in your life where you think, should I be focusing on other things like, trying to date people? I don't know.
Right.
Like trying to think about, should I be like completely changing my life direction? Should I, maybe think about becoming a lawyer, or I don't know what, but like, you know what I mean? Like doing a more traditional life path or whatever. And so sometimes but usually I just need a break, and then slowly I'm drawn back to music.
Yeah. So let's just
So sorry, I just did a tangent, but like music is just such a big commitment. And it takes so much sacrifice to play music.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a lot that goes along with it, and it's difficult. So with all the joy comes this difficulty. And so that's sometimes why I go through those periods. But anyway.
Well, that's actually a good segue to, kind of where I wanted to explore is, how did you first get into making music?
So.
And was Guns N' Roses involved in that in any way?
It's funny because I was just talking to Andrea a couple days ago about how I got started playing drums. And the same time I was into glam metal, I was in a high school band. I hurt my knee in 6th grade and I couldn't be in gym. So I joined this school band and I played violin. That was the only thing I played. So I was the only violinist in the school band. And so for marching band, they couldn't have a violin on the field. So they started teaching me how to play cymbals. And then from there, I started learning to play snare drum. So that was right at the time that I was listening to all this heavy metal. And glam metal.
So that probably was, there was obviously a connection there because of the percussive nature of, all this music.
Yeah. Like I was really into learning drums. I was like 12 and 13 while I was learning drums, and I was like so into it. Like, yeah.
I mean, do you have a drum set at home, or did you just play at school? Or?
I didn't play the drum set. I played the snare drum, like, flams and like, what are they called? The rudiments.
Right.
And just, to play with the marching band. I didn't start learning drum set till I was 19. So that was a time when I was kind of slowly getting sucked back into music. So, yeah.
So there was a time where you, in high school or something, where you weren't really
There's like a two-year blackout period from freshman and sophomore year. A high school I was going to was Hampton High School in Hampton, Virginia. And most of the student body listened to hip hop. And I had 2 or 3 friends though that were into alternative music. They were into like Meat Puppets and Faith No More, and like they were into punk and things like that. And
Probably
Ministry and Skinny Puppy and and goth and alternative. And so I got exposed to some stuff through that. There were literally like 2 or 3 kids in the whole high school who listened to that stuff. And then it was when I was 16 or so that my sister actually started hanging out with these cool kids at her middle school, and they introduced her to grunge. And then she introduced me to grunge. So at age 16, 17, that's finally when I started listening to the, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Smashing Pumpkins, Stone Temple Pilots, and on from there.
Yeah, I mean that was the time, right? That was when all that stuff was happening, and in the early 90s was such a like amazing time for that music to hit.
Yeah.
At the time, like, because I'm a couple years older than you, but like for that music to be hitting, like not just in kind of the culture, but also hitting us at that time in our lives was, it was pretty miraculous.
It was miraculous. It was formative. Like, I know I sound like one of those people that are like, one of the older people from that generation, or when I was that age, hearing people say there was nobody like the Eagles, but it's true. Like, I don't think there's ever been another movement as special as the grunge movement since then. Like, not that's hit the mainstream, not that's been that dark and that edgy and had that much to say. I understand pop music is taking over the world, and they have things to say too, but it's just a different way that they're saying it, I guess.
No, I think you're right. And I don't know, there's a lot that's been said about grunge, and there's, I think a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people that I've interviewed for this show have talked about the importance of grunge, and it certainly was a big thing for me. And I think, I don't know, we could probably do a whole series of episodes about just like the relationship between grunge and metal.
Yeah,
and,
totally.
I think it's one of those formative questions that we ask, like, you ask 10 metalheads and you'll probably get 10 different answers, right?
Yeah.
Is grunge metal? I don't know. Like, a case can be made.
Yeah.
Either way.
A lot of metalheads hate grunge.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not one of those people. I love it. It was super important to me. And, but it was really interesting to have it kind of happen, at that time, and sort of also the impact it had on metal in America, because like you had, in the 80s, like thrash was really growing huge in the late 80s, right? You had, Metallica and Slayer and Anthrax and Megadeth and all that stuff that was happening in the late 80s. And then all of a sudden, like, basically when Nevermind came out, like pretty much American metal just went into the tank for like almost a decade.
Right.
There was really cool stuff happening in metal, and there was some cool stuff happening in the US, but like the Florida death metal stuff in the 90s was really awesome. But that was not mainstream stuff.
Yes.
Like, I feel like thrash was really trending toward the mainstream.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And of course, Metallica did release the Black Album in 91 too. So, but it really changed. The whole conversation about metal changed, I think, when grunge hit.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some people would debate me on this, and I'd probably love to have those conversations, but.
Yeah, it's true. In the mainstream, it went underground. It hibernated when the grunge was like, it was kind of a hybrid of, the dark, heavy edginess, but mixed with the simplicity of punk. And I think it's that simplicity that a lot of metalheads take offense to. They're kind of like, how can this,
Yeah, this music is like
it's not advanced enough. It's not technical enough. It's not,
Yeah, we're not like, it's not technically proficient enough or whatever.
Yeah.
This is just like, four guys just like playing the same three chords over and over.
Yeah, it's three chords and the truth and flannel. So
Right. Exactly. I want to get back to like, sort of your evolution with music, both as a fan and as a musician, and like sort of, can you walk me through like sort of your formative years and maybe take me through like the 90s and the 2000s, like to the point where like you started doing stuff like SubRosa, and I'm not sure I don't actually know what you were doing before SubRosa.
Yeah. So throughout the 90s, was it Kurt Cobain who said something like, some people listen to music, a lot of people listen to music and love it, but then there are those people who love it so much they become musicians or something like that. Or there are people who listen to it and then they choose to become musicians or something. Getting drawn back into grunge music did parallel me wanting to start joining bands and playing music and learning instruments that could be adopted into bands, because I wanted to be in a band. So at age 19, I was going to Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. And, I didn't fit in and I hated it. And I had a cool little group of friends who were really awesome. But overall I was like, really angsty. And anyway, I just, as a way of coping with it and wanting to like assert my identity, I was like, I want to join a band. So I want to join the music scene here. And I went to, there were local bands in Provo and I would go see them. And that's when I started learning the drum set, was when I was 19. And during that whole time I was getting, I was out of my parents' house for the first time. So age 18, I was starting to finally go to a bunch of shows, and going to as many shows as I could up in Salt Lake, but seeing a lot of local shows in Provo. And just getting a feel for there's a big music world out there,
Yeah, and Salt Lake has a really vibrant counterculture.
It does. It always has.
A lot of people don't realize that.
They don't.
I mean, I grew up in Denver, and so Denver and Salt Lake, the punk scene was there was a lot of crossover between the punk scene in Denver and the punk scene in Salt Lake. And, I think some of us who grew up in kind of like, I grew up in the Rocky Mountain West, and, those of us who did knew that about Salt Lake, but a lot of people have this image of Salt Lake that it's this like super straight-laced place. And it's like, it's not actually. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening in Salt Lake.
Yeah. I mean, there's two opposing cultures there. There's the dominant conservative culture, and then there's this, but that breeds vibrant countercultures.
Right.
And I mean, the music scene in Salt Lake was so special and, you know, so sincere, and just like, I mean, people, it's like we had to create an alternate world to survive, you know? And so it was very powerful and a huge influence on me. And one of my biggest influences actually was right around the same time I was learning drums. It was within a year after I started learning drums. You know, I found out about a band in the Provo scene, in the Utah County scene, called the Red Bennies. And they had a huge influence on me and on my sound. I mean, they were the number one influence on SubRosa's sound. That's where I found out about sludge metal. That's what drew me into the whole sludge metal scene. You know, before I ever learned about the Melvins or about Isis or Neurosis or anything like that, there was the Red Bennies.
Wow.
So yeah, they were influenced by Sleep. Back in 1996 is when I first saw them. And that was when no one knew who Sleep was, but that was their number one influence. And so they had that. And a little bit of grunge and a little bit of Jimi Hendrix and other things that were just completely their own. So,
I am not familiar with the Red Bennies. I'm going to have to go check that out.
yes. I mean, they've evolved over time. Dave Payne is the lead singer and guitarist. And, you know,
Are they from Provo? No.
American Fork is where Dave is from, yeah.
Wow.
And so he actually gave me a few guitar lessons when SubRosa started, and he taught me the drop B tuning, you know, just as an offhand kind of thing. And I fell in love with that tuning, and that was the main tuning for SubRosa. We rarely played any songs outside of drop B.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I brought that tuning into the keening too, because I adore it so much. And, you know, it's maybe half and half. Half is standard, half is drop B. So so
I haven't had a conversation with anybody about drop B. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so it's just come full circle. Like the Red Bennies, they had a huge influence on SubRosa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, and also, you know, so you were going to, what other shows were happening at that? You know, what other bands were you listening to and going to shows? And like you said, you went to a ton of shows in Provo. Was it kind of like lots of different types of stuff, or were you drawn to the same kind of? It
was lots of different kinds of stuff. And I never thought twice about it. I just thought, like, what draws people to want to seek out live music and some people not? I don't know, but I was rabid about it. And I went and checked out, you know, almost any band I could. I tried to stay up on what was happening in the Provo music scene. And I had a lot of friends into a lot of different kinds of music. I had a cousin into ska, so I went to a lot of ska shows. My drum teacher was the drummer for a ska band in Salt Lake called Stretch Armstrong, STRETSCH, and they were one of the best ska bands that has ever existed. I mean, they're better than most of the big names in the ska world. But anyway, so ska was huge at the time, so I was kind of into that for a minute, and I was into...
Because this is like, we're now in the late 90s, maybe? Like,
yeah, exactly. It was 94 when I went to BYU.
I remember the ska moment. There was also like, emo was starting to happen.
Yeah.
So that was kind of this like, there was this transition from like early 90s punk through to like emo to this like pop punk, post-punk thing.
Yes.
That was going on. We mentioned there was death metal happening in other parts of the country, but so there was a lot going on, and it was all kind of fragmented, you know. But but what came through Provo that really piqued your interest?
So a big thing going on at the time that people kind of forget about, along with the grunge movement, was all the alternative bands to the side that were a little more mainstream, like Juliana Hatfield 5, was that it? The Lemonheads, you know, Pavement was a great band, Pixies. All those bands were happening at the same time. And so there were a lot of bands in Provo that were kind of following that kind of, you know, alternative movement that it's hard to describe. It's kind of like, you know, it was like edgy but kind of whimsical at the same time, and a little bit poppy and a little bit distorted, and, you know, lots of thrift shop clothing. And I don't know how to describe it, but that was like a huge thing in the Provo music scene. So I saw lots of terrible bands that way, and a lot of good bands too. There were some really good bands. I went to like Battle of the Bands in Provo, and I mean, I told you, Brian, I was not like, I don't have cool beginnings. Like I kind of just latched onto anything I could. And I didn't have a lot of people around me exposing me to the really, really cool bands. I was doing a lot of the searching on my own until I got plugged into the Provo music scene by joining bands. I kind of started getting exposed to more at age 20 when I went on a date with this guy to a house show, and at the house show was playing. It was one of the most powerful experiences of my life. I walked in and all of a sudden I was taken from the squeaky clean kind of fake atmosphere of Provo, Utah to this room where people were sitting around in band t-shirts, like completely depressed and just like full of ennui and just like the weight of the world on their shoulders, and just like they couldn't handle life. And they were listening to a band called Kid Hideaway and the War Boys. And they were sitting there as if their life, and listening as if their life depended on it. And they couldn't survive without that music. And I was really intimidated. And also I looked around and thought, these are my people. And Kid Hideaway and the War Boys, it was either War Boy or War Boys, I can't remember now. But Dave Payne was the drummer for that band. And he was the lead singer and guitarist of Red Bennies, Optimus Prime, and I think probably some other bands in the music scene. And there were several bands that were kind of forming this nexus that were part of this really vibrant Provo scene. But they were singing to the people that were the outcasts. They were connecting with the people who didn't fit in. And that's why their music was so powerful and important to a lot of people there. So that was a really long answer to your question, but yeah.
I like long answers.
Yeah.
You talked about Outcasts, and you talked about also going to BYU. Did you grow up in the Mormon church?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to ask, just because I have some, not personally, because I didn't grow up in that church, but my ex-wife, her whole family grew up in the Mormon church, and so I've spent a lot of time around Mormons in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to be totally honest, the idea of a metalhead coming out of the Mormon church is something that is a bit surprising to me. So
yeah.
You probably felt like an outcast, I'm guessing, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So, what was that experience like? I mean, talk to me about that.
I mean, that's what drew me to heavy music to begin with, and to the vibe and the feeling of metal music from age 12 was not fitting in general anywhere, not only in the church I grew up in and the culture there, which I totally didn't fit in, and, felt absolutely almost sick with anxiety and depression and, anything, just so uncomfortable being around people in the church who seemed so well adjusted and happy. And I wasn't any of those things. And then also I didn't fit in school. And, I started getting bullied at a young age, like pretty much from third grade on is when I just started experiencing a lot of friction with friends and just people in general who seemed to just hate me and turned on me, and not only made fun of me and mocked me, but just turned on me viciously. And that was kind of a theme of my life. No matter where I was going to school, I switched schools, from Hunt Valley, in Springfield, Virginia, to the school Randolph in San Antonio. And then from there, so between those two schools, I experienced a lot of bullying and things like that. So those are kinds of the things that made me disenchanted with society and misanthropic, I guess you could say, and also very self-conscious and very vulnerable, and just wondering what was wrong with me. And that's, why I turned to metal, because, it was all about like rebellion and also individuality and inner strength. And so I really identified with that and felt strength through that music and camaraderie. And so I'm sure you probably get that story from a lot of metalheads, that's why they're drawn to metal. But yeah.
Yeah, it definitely comes up a lot when I've talked to people that, for various reasons, I think, it's one of the, I think, common themes in just humanity is that we're all looking for community, right?
Yeah.
We're social creatures, and we're all looking for our people. Like, you found your people in that room, those depressed kids wearing band t-shirts, like watching that house show, you know?
Yeah.
And that's a big reason why I started this show, is because I wanted to hear these stories, and I wanted these stories to be sort of memorialized, because I feel like there's thousands and thousands and thousands of metalheads out there, and everybody's got their own story. And yeah, I mean, there's some commonalities, but everybody's got their own unique story as well. But yeah, we found, I know that's part of my story, and it's part of several stories that I've heard and recorded on this show, is people finding community.
Yeah.
People finding acceptance, in some cases for the first time in their life.
Yes, that's right.
Is that metalheads embraced these people.
Yeah.
Oftentimes when they were young and at an age where, you know, maybe they were being bullied, or maybe they were just felt like an outcast or a loner. They didn't know how to make friends. And all of a sudden, these people, these strange, weird, spiky, dirty people, put their arms around you and take you in and say, hey, you're one of us. You know, you like this music.
Yeah.
You know, you're in.
Yeah. Like finding understanding.
Yeah.
Like, I did have some faithful friends during that time, and I can remember them by name because there were so few. One was Jeremy Swafford. He introduced me to Metallica in 6th grade. He loved Metallica, and he wore Metallica shirts all the time, and he loved penguins, and we were like fast friends. And we actually wrote we wrote a play for the school talent show about metalheads, and it was like banned by the teachers. They wouldn't let us play or actually, I think we did perform, and then the student body had to vote on their favorite performances, and they wouldn't let us get upvoted or something like that because it was, I don't know, they just didn't approve or whatever.
They didn't want you to be the favorite.
Yeah, they didn't.
They knew.
Yeah. And I used to write lots of little comic strips about, you know, girls in stilettos and fishnets and like metalheads, like, you know, I don't know, like I drew and doodled a lot around that time too. And so did Jeremy. And then I had a friend, Jenny, I forget her last name, in middle school, that was her brothers and sisters were into metal, and so she was into metal, and then she introduced me to more metal, like, you know, the big names at the time, like, you know, Anthrax, Metallica, Megadeth, Motley Crue. And then I had a friend, Mac Powell, who was a skater, and he also listened to a lot of that and punk too. And a friend named Bobby McManaway. And she wasn't really that into music, but yeah, she was one of my few friends that, you know, was my real friend.
Yeah, I think that stuff is really important. I'm dwelling on, you had this skater friend named Mac Powell, which just sounds to me like the most ultimate punk skater name. Like, of course his name was Mac Powell. Of course
it was Mac Powell. And Mac Powell was exactly how you'd imagine him. Like, he was such a skater. He had dark brown hair that was combed forward and beautiful green eyes, and just looked cool. He looked a lot like Chris Cornell, actually. So yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. Well, if Mac is listening, you know,
I know. Mac
shout out to Mac Powell.
Shout out to Mac. Jeremy Swafford looked me up on Facebook like 20 years later. Like, he remembered me like it was yesterday. Like, yeah, he was one of the only friends who I knew wouldn't make fun of me and was always cool to me. But anyway, it's weird. I haven't really talked about any of these things ever, like, in a long time. I don't think I've ever told anyone about walking into that room with Kid Hideaway and the War Boys. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to tell that story. I think these things are really important, and, you know, I'm interested in, you know, all of it. I think it's really cool. Even though I don't know who Kid Hideaway and the War Boys is. I've never heard of that band, but
they're so good.
It's kind of funny too, because I think some people expect me to sort of have encyclopedic knowledge of music. And I'm like, I know a lot because I've been around a long time and I'm kind of old, but I don't know every band that's ever existed. Yeah. And there's a lot of metal bands that I'm like, I don't know who that band is. And it's funny. No, I know you weren't expecting that, but it's like some people I think are like, oh, you've never heard of them?
Dude, I'm like that all the time. I have like huge gaps in my musical knowledge and pop culture knowledge. And people be like, you don't know this huge mainstream artist, and I'm like, no, who's Taylor Swift? No, but it's not like I know she is, but like, it'll be like that bad.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, that happens all the time. People are just shocked if you don't have the exact same life experience as they do.
Yeah.
They're like, what?
Yeah, totally. But Kid Hideaway and the War Boys, they were They were a local Provo band. They were
Mhm.
playing a house show. That was the show I walked in on.
That's awesome.
So
So you went to a lot of shows. You're learning the drum set. You're learning about drop B tuning.
I didn't learn about drop B tuning till 10 years later.
Oh, okay.
When I started SubRosa.
So you're learning about all this stuff. You're meeting some of these people, and like it starts to sort of morph into your like, getting involved in making music now.
Yes.
Can you talk about some of the like important like moments that happened in that part of your life that sort of, set you on this path that like, resulted in where you're at today and what happened with SubRosa and all the other stuff?
Yeah. So there was this gang of kids on the campus of Brigham Young University who were always walking around with like black bomber jackets with like band patches on the back and looking super edgy with like wallet chains. And I was just like, who are those cool kids? And there was one of them who I had a crush on. Like I'd see him like walking up to campus and back, and he always had a toothpick in his mouth. Like, I don't know, he was just super cool. His name was Shane Holmes. And anyway, I was learning drum set at the time, taking lessons diligently every week, practicing every day for like 8 months. Like in my college dorm, I like cleared, with all my neighbors, I'm going to practice between noon and 1 every day. Is that cool? So they all signed off on it. So I was practicing drums, getting better. And at the end of 8 months, I was like, okay, I feel like I'm about ready to join a band. I considered learning bass. I just wanted to learn an instrument that would get me into a band. And drums are like the most, usually needed instrument.
Drums will do it.
Yeah. So it was around that time that one of my mutual friends who knew me and Shane was like, well, Shane is looking for a drummer for his band. And I was like, no way, And so,
because he's so cool.
Yeah, he's so cool. So we ended up meeting within a week or so, and he was in a band called the Soda Jerks, and they were like 50s garage band. And they, but like the really cool 50s garage music that's all underground and like, fast girls driving fast cars and like, James Dean, and maybe not even James Dean, but they played like my college dorm cafeteria when I was a freshman. It's hilarious. So we met within a week, and he kind of got a feel for my drum skill level, and felt like he could work with me because he was a drummer. Mm-hmm. And so, we started meeting, and he started teaching me the drum beats for his band. And so the first project I was in was called the High Rollers. And we were just straight up 50s garage music. We wore like go-go boots and all of that. I know this is probably hilarious.
No, this is awesome. I love this.
But it was like very, dirty, like very like distorted, like naughty garage music. And we had this incredible guitarist named Thomas. Oh, I forget Thomas's last name. And a girl named Melanie. And I can't remember everyone, but I think it was just the four of us. And we started playing local shows. So one of my first show in Salt Lake was playing Bert's Tiki Lounge at age 20. So I had an underage ID from Shane Holmes' like ex-girlfriend. I looked a lot like her. And that was my first show ever to play in Salt Lake City, and played many shows at Bert's Tiki Lounge after that, many shows with SubRosa, many years down the line. So we played shows in Provo, like Mama's Cafe. We played Soul Kitchen, I believe. We played like the big venues at the time, and started getting a feeling for being in a band. Then I left Provo for a while and came back. Wasn't sure if I wanted to continue playing music. I went through a hard time when the High Rollers were playing. I went through a really dark time. So it was like the best of times and the worst of times, like as this musical side of me started to emerge. Some things happened, and I kind of thought, I don't know if I'm going to go back into music, but I did. And then I joined a few other bands when I came back to Provo, then left, got engaged, left Utah, didn't think I'd ever come back. I was like, I'm never going back to Utah. And then just got this overwhelming feeling that I really needed to go back to Salt Lake and be part of the music scene there. Not Provo, but Salt Lake. And I knew of bands in the Salt Lake music scene. knew of the amazing counterculture there. And a lot of my friends had moved, or bands that were playing in Provo moved up to Salt Lake. And so they were kind of forming a nucleus there. And I just had this feeling, like, while I was engaged, I was like, I just had this feeling of dread, thinking of marrying this guy who was a really cool guy, a really good guy, but just not the right match. And all I could think was, all I want to do is move to Salt Lake and join a band and be part of the music scene. But I can't, because I've committed to doing this other thing. And it's weird how you get in that mindset, you know, when you feel like you've got to do something that you've committed to doing, or that is hard to get out of. You're going to hurt people, you know. Mm-hmm. That was one of the first times I realized, like, actually, I have the power to change this. And and instead of waiting for something to happen, I'm just gonna say no, and I'm just gonna go do what I want. So that's what I did. I broke off the engagement, moved to Salt Lake, started joining bands. My first band I joined was called Violet Run in Salt Lake City. We lasted for 8 years. It was a goth band that got us being part of the goth scene.
Were you playing drums in that band?
Yeah, I played drums in that band. I was part of like 9 or 10 bands before SubRosa started, always as a drummer. So because people always need drummers. So I got, better and better, started learning more variety of music. What were some other bands I was in at that time? I was in a band with my friend called Nell Nash. Violet Run was the most prominent of the bands. Everything else was kind of ancillary. Ancillary.
Yeah.
Then, as I was playing drums in bands for years in the Salt Lake music scene and just going to see hundreds of shows and I just threw myself into the whole music scene. I joined the Slug magazine staff as a staff writer. I was the associate editor of Slug, Salt Lake Underground music magazine, for 3 years. I was on the staff of City Weekly as a copy editor, and later as a CD review columnist.
And City Weekly was the other alt-weekly, right?
Yeah, the other alt-weekly. I was a part of the Event News Weekly, which was also a weekly music magazine in Salt Lake that kind of ended after a year. But anyway, I just started meeting people. I started networking. I started learning about how underground the music works, started getting exposed to the whole indie rock underground, exposed to all kinds of music through Slug. And in 2002, I started working for the End Records to kind of fill in, Slug they could only afford me for like 15 hours a week. And so I was always doing like pizza delivery jobs and UPS and stuff to fill in, because Slug, I had to work for Slug,
Yeah.
And the publisher, Angela Brown, is still one of my very best friends, like top 3 best friends,
That's great.
And so I joined the End Records and worked for them for about 6 to 8 months. And that's when I first started learning about underground metal. I went to CMJ and South by Southwest as a staff member of Slug, and started. I remember once I was in this show, I think Crisis was playing. No, it wasn't Crisis. It was In Flames, maybe. Anyway, I was watching a metal band of some kind, and there was this CD that was playing, or this music that was playing, and I went up to the club owner and I was like, "What is this band? It's amazing." And he pulled the CD out from the CD player, and it was an orange and white CD, and it said 1515. And I was like, "What is that band?" And he was like, "I don't know. It's just 1515. I was like, "How do I find out who this band is? The most amazing band." And when I heard it, I was like, this is the kind of music I want to make ultimately, but I don't hear it that often. So anyway, I was working at the End Records, and he would hand me CDs and be like, "Listen to this, listen to that." That's when I first listened to Agalloch. That's when I first, just fell in love with Agalloch and heard Green Carnation and, Porcupine Tree and, The Gathering. And one day he handed me this CD and he was like, "Listen to this." And I grabbed it, and it was an orange and white CD that said 1515. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I've been looking for this CD for like 2 years. Like, who is this?" And he was like, "This is a band called Isis." And that's when I started listening to Isis and Neurosis and started realizing, like, oh my gosh, there's this, and Sleep, and just like, there's this whole underground doom metal movement or sludge metal movement that sounds like the Red Bennies. And I'd never heard another band like the Red Bennies before. I didn't complete the circle. I listened to like Dixie Witch and like Fireball Ministry. And I did start listening to the Melvins, in the early, 2000, 2001. But I would just listen to the heaviest music I could find. But those were kind of offshoots. The stoner rock and Southern rock movement was kind of an offshoot of rock, and grunge and sludge. But I didn't realize there was a kind of a metal version of it until the End Records. So that's when I got plugged into the whole underground metal scene and realized there was this whole movement happening, and started following it. A whole world, a whole universe, a whole beautiful universe, the place where I really felt like I belonged. Even though I had so many friends that were part of the indie rock world, I loved it. I loved that music, but I always knew I was an outsider. I always felt like I didn't quite fit in. I was like, I'm not really into like illustrate your own comic night at Kilby Court. Like it's fun, but
this theme of belonging, I think, is a really important one. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about personally lately too, is like, how do you find the music that's yours? I mean, this is a good question for the podcast, even though the podcast doesn't necessarily revolve entirely around the making of music. It's more about like who we are as fans, right? That's really the subject. But I can't really extricate the two from each other, right? Like, they're so mixed up. And I mean, myself as like a frustrated musician myself, I've been, wrestling with this question for years. Like, what is my music? The music that I was meant to make. Yeah. Right? And so how did like, you've just sort of described a bit about how you kind of like came into the music. You're like, this is what I was meant for.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really powerful stuff, because it's, I don't know, it's hard. And I guess what I'm going to be interested to uncover in the course of doing this show and hearing people's stories is, when I talk to people who are musicians or people who are not musicians, that theme of belonging and that theme of like, when it clicks and you feel like I'm there, this is where I'm supposed to be.
Yes.
It's different for everyone, but I feel like I want to uncover like what's at the heart of that. Like, how do we find that,
It was thrilling. Like, I think you just come at it through trial and error. Like you get close a lot. You get close and you feel pretty happy. Like you feel happy that you found something that's close. Like the goth scene for me was like very close, very close. In Salt Lake, there's a huge goth scene, actually, one of the biggest goth scenes in the United States. And they have a whole, series of clubs that support the goth movement and dance night and, different DJ nights and like, several hundred goths would descend on Area 51, every weekend and dance their hearts away till 2 a.m. And, Sisters of Mercy and, anyway, when Violet Wren became part of that underground goth scene, I definitely felt like I could relate and huge fan of course, all the goth music, like The Cure is still one of my, how can you even, I can't even, there's no one that can compare. Like
The Cure was hugely important to me.
So hugely important. And just their songwriting. I mean, there's nothing like, yeah. I just read this homage to The Cure from the lead singer of the Dresden Dolls. What's her name? Amanda Palmer. Yes. Gosh, how can I forget that? Anyway, she was just going off on The Cure and what a big influence on her they were. And I feel that way too. So anyway, of course, I loved that music. But I always felt a little bit like I was on the outside of the goth scene. Again, I just felt like I'm kind of an observer. Like they accept me and I'm a participant, but I'm also an observer. I always still felt like I was an observer. Like I was just kind of on the edge of the scene, just kind of looking in, like I was looking in at a shop display. Not like I was looking at them like animals in a zoo or something. They were my friends, and I was very, very close friends in the goth scene. And but I always had this weird sense of like I'm not as dedicated. I'm not wearing those like thigh high platform boots that are 7 inches tall. And like, I'm not completely dialed into the lifestyle completely. And I don't know, like it still is a sense of like, I'm a guest here. And they welcome me with so much hospitality, and they are such wonderful people. Oh my gosh, like the goth scene, the whole music scene in Salt Lake, all the different subgenres are full of amazing people. Like I can't say enough about all the wonderful and kind and amazing people I've met in throughout all the scenes in Salt Lake.
I think no matter what, you're going to have, no matter how goth you are, there's always going to be somebody more goth than you. Yeah. Right? And this is true about metalheads too, mm-hmm. right? You know, like there's always going to be some dude out there who's more metal than I am. So at some point, I stopped caring about that. Yeah, I get it. Like you were accepted and you were, you fit in, but you also didn't feel like a deep sense of attachment to it, is what I'm kind of hearing. I
felt like a guest invited to their home, and they were such wonderful. It was such a wonderful, welcoming home, but it felt like a home that it wasn't my home that I had bought. And it felt like a home I was maybe going to move on from or something. Not that you move on from goth, but like, it just felt like I was a guest there. And, you know, the leaders of the scene, like a girl named Alanya, Maya, Alyssa Smith, Tony, like the guys in the big bands, Derek and his girlfriend Donna at the time, and Tragic Black, they actually are pretty big in the death rock scene now, currently, mm-hmm. I think. And Redemption is a big goth band in the Salt Lake scene. And all those people were just so formative for me and so welcoming. And I did absolutely feel like I fit in more to the goth scene than the general indie rock scene in Salt Lake. But little by little, I'm trying to think about how did I make the leap from Violet Run to SubRosa. So all the time, those 8 or 9 years, I was playing drums in bands and different kinds of bands, but all of them were dark. All of them were heavy. All of them were edgy. They had all that in common. So during the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, I felt like, you know, playing drums, I love it. And I love it so much. And I felt very comfortable playing drums and being hidden behind my drum set on stage. But I just had this nagging feeling like the real thing my real path is that I'm supposed to write my own music and I'm supposed to be the lead singer of my own project. And I did not like that inner voice. I was like, nope. I would like squelch it because I did not want to sing in front of a band. I didn't want to be the lead singer of a band. I didn't want to sing in front of people.
It's a huge responsibility.
Yeah. I didn't want to learn guitar properly. I never actually learned it properly, but I learned it enough to play in SubRosa. I was very comfortable behind the drum set, and I wanted that to be the path, you know? I really wanted that to be the thing that I was meant to do. And I really clung to that, and still that nagging feeling inside me kept continuing. And at one point, a girl approached me to be in a band called Stiletto. She was a girl in the Salt Lake music scene called Carrie Wakefield, and she was so cool. And she brought me a cassette tape with like X-ray specs on it and Joan Jett, and she was like, "This is what I kind of want to sound like." And I think Wendy O. Williams was on there, and anyway, I was like in the Runaways, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I want to join this band. So I started playing drums for Stiletto, and that was kind of 3 years where I guess I could have started SubRosa, but I wanted to be distracted. Mm-hmm. And it was so amazing being in Stiletto, and I found like lifelong friends through Stiletto. We were a very tight group of friends. So I played drums in Stiletto for a couple years, and then I started learning guitar. I might have stopped playing for a while and then came back and started learning guitar. And the other girl in the band who wrote the main music, the guitar music, was Julie Stutznegger. And she's a huge part of the Salt Lake music scene. Been in tons and tons of punk bands. And is in the most recent band she was in was Invaders. Huge, like crushing, like sludge metal band in Salt Lake, like so heavy. Anyway, she started teaching me the guitar parts for stiletto. And so I played with stiletto a few times as the guitarist. That was my first time playing guitar in front of people. So about 3 years into stiletto, it was spring, it was May. I can't remember what year, 2005. I kind of went through this heartbreak, this dating heartbreak. And I had this feeling, I was like, it's now or never. I've got to start that band that I know I need to start, that I've been running from. And so that summer, the summer of 2005, I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. I know I kind of want to sound like Red Benny's, and I kind of want to sound like PJ Harvey, and I'm going to just Frankenstein this together. And I kind of have this idea. I want it to have like this kind of punk vibe. I want it to be this kind of aggressive vibe. I want it to be these big fat riffs that are kind of in your face. And I want some weird timing. And I kind of knew the vibe. And I took a little bit of PJ Harvey, like blues roots and folk elements and, the Red Benny sludge metal, and just kind of Frankenstein them together and just got a guitar to, like, I don't know, like $150 guitar, used guitar or something from, I don't know, I don't know where, I can't remember my first guitar. And I was like, I'm going to start this band. And my friend, one of my best friends at the time, Sarah Pendleton, was learning violin. And she was like, well, I want to do music with you. And I was like, okay, sure, let's see how this will work. But I was like, I don't know if this is going to fit into my brutal, idea of like this band that's just going to melt everyone's faces off. Like, I don't know how violin's going to fit in with this. But I was like, all right, let's try this, And so she literally just had a few lessons, and we were like, let's start this band. And we had, at our first few practices, we had one amp. I don't remember where I got this amp, probably at Guitar Center, like practice amp for $100. And I was like, all right. And we had one amp between us. So one of us could plug in at a time and the other one just played acoustic. And that's when we started, like, I started writing by myself, and then I'd show her a song. And it was the first time I'd written music. Well, I wrote one song when I was 18 called Alice, and it sucked. And that's the only song I wrote before I started SubRosa. So again, it's like, where did this come from? Why was I like, I feel like I need to write my own music and be the leader of my own band. And I was just like, I'm just going to do this. I look back at it and I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, I didn't, like, it was just kind of that, it's kind of like the gall that the punk movement had too. Like, we're just going to start playing, music through these instruments, and we're not even going to be that great to start with. And we're just going to do this to express ourselves. And so that's kind of how it was. Like, it was very humble beginnings. And the band started. We had our first few practices in an apartment I was living in at the time that had a ghost living in it, actually. And it was haunted. And that was where our first few band practices. And I remember no one wanted to join our band. We were like, why doesn't anyone want to join our band? We approached like a few people, like, do you want to play bass? Do you want to play drums? No one wanted to play. All the guys we approached maybe five or six guys, and they were like, nah.
So it was just the two of you.
It was just the two of us to start with.
Yeah.
And we were like, I was like, but I was in stiletto. Like, are people excited to see what I'm doing on my own, or people want to be part of this project? But of course we were totally new and unproved, and
right.
Bands are big commitments. So finally we found this girl, Bonnie Shoop, who was like, sure, I'll be in your band. She was just starting to learn drums, literally just a few lessons in, I think, or a few months in. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll teach you the drum parts because I'm a drummer. And then we found Bonnie. And then we found, I think, a friend of Violet Run was the first bassist. Zoe was his name. And that's how. And then my friend Julie Stutzneger became the bassist after that. I think Carrie Wakefield was the bassist too at one point. We had like 12 bassists. And that's how SubRosa started.
That's so great. I love that story. It reminded me of something I saw, I'm sure online somewhere, but it was something that it really gelled with me. It was this idea that if you're ever feeling like, I guess, insignificant, or if you're feeling like I'm not good enough, or I'm not, talented enough, or I'm not committed enough as a musician or whatever, no matter how unconfident you may be, there's someone with less talent than you confidently just doing it.
Yeah.
So get over yourself and just go do it. You know, It sounds like that's like exactly what you guys were doing at the time. Like, we don't care that, you know, we just learned how to play this instrument. Who cares? Let's just do it. And I love that punk aesthetic about it too. And there's a real legacy there of, you know, where all this music came from too. I think that, you know, this did not come from a place of like virtuosity.
No,
at all, right?
No, not at all. Like, and I'm glad the beginnings were like that. And it's okay if you're really good at your instrument and you start a band too, of course. But like, there was something kind of pure and innocent about those beginnings, you know? Like, I think the most important thing for anyone who wants to do music and maybe thinks they can't or is not qualified or something is just the most important thing is the vision you have inside. Like, the vision is, there something you want to do and you just know that you want to do it, or maybe feel like almost like you're meant to do it and you're avoiding it and you're running from it. There's a book called The War of Art that I love that exactly describes that feeling of running from something maybe you feel like maybe you're destined to do or something.
I need to read
as
this
part
book.
of your life path. Yes, you absolutely have to read it. Everyone has to read it. And that's exactly what I was doing, running from starting SubRosa. You know, who knows what would have happened if I'd started it 3 years earlier when I first started getting those nudges. But, you know, I had to feel ready too.
And you had to break off an engagement first.
Yeah, I had to. Yeah. Well, breaking off the engagement happened when I was 24. SubRosa started when I was 28. So I was like part of the Salt Lake music scene for like 4 years before breaking off and starting SubRosa.
But you had stuff you had to do before you could start SubRosa.
Yeah, absolutely. I did. I had to join the Salt Lake music scene. I had to become a huge, like a very active member of it. I had to meet a lot of people. I had to work for Slug and City Weekly. I had to network and learn how to run a band, how to book your own shows, how to print your own merch, how to print your own stickers. There's this whole thing that you have to do, this maze that you have to navigate. And you turn to other bands and you're like, how do I print my own stickers? And
somebody will tell you.
Yeah. And some bands don't want to give up their secrets. And it's like, please. I always told everyone how I did things after that, like when I would encounter bands who were like, we don't want to tell you where we print our stickers. Anyway, so that, yeah, like I had to learn all those things. So when I started SubRosa, I knew how to book shows. I had the connections with local clubs. I knew how to print merch. I knew all those things, but it was very scary to start my own band. Like, it was very scary, and I didn't want to play guitar. I didn't want to be the lead singer, but I knew I had to be, to realize this artistic vision or this musical vision I had in my head of what I wanted it to feel like and be like on stage, and what I wanted the music to do to people, to try to muster that power and create that power. I had to be the one in front. I had to be at the forefront. And I knew that, like, nobody really runs a band from the drum set except maybe Phil Collins. I mean, there are some bands that do, but it's more rare. So that's why I pushed myself to get out of my comfort zone, learn guitar, learn how to sing in front of people, and start writing music. And like, I had that belief and that vision. Like, I really felt like it was important for me to express that feeling. And that's what started it. And I was so scared to sing in front of people. I'd only sung in front of people, a few times in small group settings. It was so vulnerable to sing in front of people that the first few band practices, I would just face the wall. I couldn't even sing in front of my band. And the first show we played was at a house party for like 35, 40 people. We served tea out on the front porch in these big thermoses and had some cookies, I think. And there was all these people stuffed in this little room where Violet Run used to live. And I was so scared to sing in front of people that I was like wearing boots and I was shaking in them. So I was literally shaking in my boots, like singing. Yeah. But I just hit it and we got through it and we played. But yeah, and then I look back at those moments, and then some of the last shows of SubRosa where we were playing Grass Pop in front of like 8,000 people, and we were playing Hellfest in front of 4,000 or 5,000 people. We played Roadburn in front of a few thousand, and I wasn't scared then. Like,
oh, no.
I always got, you always get a little bit of adrenaline, but no, I grew into that. I slowly, within the first year, became pretty comfortable singing in front of more and more people.
I have two other things that I want to talk to you about. One, I want to ask you a little bit about like the genesis of the keening, because that's another project that is coming out very soon and will probably already be out by the time this episode airs. So I want to ask you about that, but I also want to ask you a question I asked Andrea too. As a woman in the metal scene, what's been your experience like in terms of just, have you ever found it like to be an issue? It sounds like you've worked with a lot of women, and the reason I bring this up is because I feel like things have changed a lot, but I'm always interested to hear that, because obviously it would be easy for me to say I'm not a woman. When I was a kid, you like never saw women on stage.
Yeah.
You almost never saw women in the audience.
Yeah.
It was like this was like the metal scene in the mid 80s through, I don't know when it started to change, but at that time it was just like pretty much the domain of men.
Yeah.
And I love how this has changed, and I love how inclusive the metal scene is now, and that you don't just see women on stage, you see lots of queer folks and trans people, and you see all kinds of people. You see a very racially diverse group of musicians on stage and in the audience, and I'm like, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
And so I'm just interested in your perspective on like what's it been like to have this sort of journey as a woman in the metal scene, and having seen that evolve, because you've been involved for long enough to have seen some of that evolution. What's that been like for you?
Yeah. When I started SubRosa, I did know that I was fighting against the gender norms of the time. Like, you're right. I'm so excited to see the music scene in general changing. I mean, it's changed so much since SubRosa started in 2005, and it's just been so exciting to see those changes. But yeah, that was a big part of the confrontational nature of SubRosa. I was very frustrated and felt very caged in and very angry by the expectations that I saw around me and the way women were marketed. I remember seeing, I think it was Britney Spears on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. This must have been in the 90s. And I was just like, it was just all around me, like how women were marketed. And, just as products, like beautiful sexualized products to make money for record labels owned and run by men. And just seeing the pressure that I felt like a lot of women felt, that they had to look a certain way or be a certain way or present themselves a certain way to be a part of to play music and be part of the music scene. Like, I hated that. And it just always made my soul feel so empty and defeated and numb to see those things. That was a big motivation with SubRosa. I was definitely like very deliberate in the way I presented ourselves. Me and I didn't tell anyone else how to present themselves, but like I think we hardly ever had pictures of ourselves in the albums. I was like, nope, we're not going to show people what we look like. There was one picture of ourselves in The Worm Has Turned. That was our first kind of demo-ish album or whatever. Mm-hmm. But after that, we never had a picture of ourselves in the albums. And I just was like, I'm not going to present myself a certain way so that people feel like, I don't want girls to feel like they have to be a certain way to be, accepted or respected in the metal scene. And so I always kind of dress like a bit like a tomboy or something, like kind of played down my femininity, maybe to a fault, I don't know. But like, I just was definitely resentful of the fact that those messages were around me, that I had to be that way to market myself. As far as like being accepted in the metal scene, it's weird because in the years before SubRosa started, I definitely encountered sexism and stuff at work and in the music scene from time to time. But in the metal scene specifically, it's weird. Like with SubRosa, I feel like for the most part, we were treated pretty respectfully all throughout the whole time together as a band. I didn't run across that much sexism or chauvinism in the people that we ran across and worked with, like booking agents, promoters, label owners. Like, I feel lucky. I know that's not everyone's experience. Like I said, I've run across plenty of sexism and chauvinism, but not really in the metal scene specifically. Like Chris Bruni was just a delight to work with, the owner of Profound Lore. Like, he always treated me absolutely like an equal. He was never condescending to me. He was never made me feel less than or like he looked down on me in any way as a woman. I was like an equal partner with him. I mean, occasionally I would run into things, but very rarely. And the male musicians in the scene too, in other bands were, very accepting of SubRosa. I always felt like they were really respectful. Of course, the doom metal scene is it's very progressive. I don't know about all the subgenres. I brush with them, of course, too. But I know they're not all, maybe I'm biased, but I know they're not all quite as progressive and open-minded as doom metal scene, maybe.
That's one of my goals for this project is to like, I guess the thing I've been joking about is I'm never going to have a hard time finding white dudes to interview for this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be easy. So I have to really make sure that I take an extra effort to, find people who are not white dudes to interview for this podcast. Because I really want those voices to be heard. And so, yes, I think you're probably right. Not every subgenre is going to be quite as like open-minded and accepting of everyone as doom is. I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, or maybe I should just say like I don't have experience being really immersed in the black metal scene or in the thrash metal scene, and so I don't know how those scenes operate. They might be like pretty progressive, but I just know in the doom metal scene, it seems like I'm a little bit spoiled because I don't know those experiences, but in the doom metal scene, it's been really amazing. And I have to hand it to the guys in the doom metal scene and the sludge metal scene, like how accepting they've been of women. And I think that's why there are so many women participants in the doom metal scene, like Windhand and Blood Ceremony and Jex Thoth and like kind of all the doom adjacent or psychedelic or the kind of this whole scene, like the bands that play at Roadburn, Kylesa.
Yeah.
My gosh, I could go on and on. Like
There's
Emma
lots.
Ruth Rundle, like they've been for the most part like super cool, like to the women in the scene. And I think it's been a safe place for a lot of women to be in bands and express themselves. And I think that's why you see kind of a disproportionate amount of women in that corner of the metal scene.
Mm-hmm. I feel like the next place where it's starting to happen more is in black metal, actually, especially like in, US black metal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last night I saw Ludacra play,
Gosh.
There's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Laurie and Christy basically anchoring that band. I'm so bummed they're not going to continue. But that's another subject. But I went to Covenant Festival in Vancouver, BC in July. And there's a band called Sortilegia that plays a two-piece black metal band that's fronted by a woman who played that festival 6 months pregnant.
Wow, that's awesome.
So it's she plays guitar and sings, and then she's got a drummer. And I'm like walking, we're at the festival, and there's this pregnant lady there.
Yeah,
and I'm like, you don't see that at a metal show very often.
Yeah,
and then later I'm like, wait.
She's playing.
She's on stage,
Yeah.
So visibly pregnant. And so, really cool, like that kind of acceptance. And the Covenant Fest, I mean, that's a scene that's like a war metal scene. I mean, this is like some of the like most cavernous black metal that you'll find.
Yeah.
And, there was women on stage in that festival as well. So, you're seeing more of it. I think in black metal, I think like death metal has got some reckoning to do with its very misogynistic past.
Yeah.
But that's beginning to change too. I think, I saw a band this summer, Castrator, that is just basically, it's an all-woman death metal band. And they're taking back that kind of like, the violence and stuff of the death metal, like lyrical content.
Right.
And they're basically just owning it. And they're saying like, they have like their merch. They sell booty shorts that say, watch your balls across the ass, And it's like really fun. I mean, this is great. Like, using that sort of like there's a humor there and using that to sort of like reckon with some of the like, really problematic shit that exists in the past of death metal.
Yeah.
So that's cool. I like what you had to say about the doom metal scene being so accepting, because I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I think you're right. I think you're onto something. I guess I sort of always thought of that as just being kind of a coincidence, but maybe it's not.
Yeah. Maybe because the doom metal is kind of pushing the frontiers and kind of mixing with a lot of other genres. It's kind of like one of the most out there genres of metal, and that kind of like I said, like mixes with other genres too. And maybe that's why, because it's progressive in those ways. Maybe it's more progressive. It attracts people who are willing to think outside the box or something. I don't know, but. Also, I forgot to mention, I mean, there were also like, Arch Enemy, Angela, there, even Evanescence, who I don't like, but like there were these female metal singers that
it's worth mentioning. Evanescence. I think that's a conversation that's worth having. Yeah.
Yeah. Like those women had a big influence on other women too. And like their contribution can't be underestimated. It'll be great if when one day we don't even really think about, the gender of the people in the band, they were just like, oh, there's a great band I saw. And instead of, oh, there's a great band I saw. And isn't it great to see a woman playing in the band too,
Yeah.
Some people don't like gender being pointed out at all. And like, oh, there's a girl in the band. But I personally feel like it's important. I feel like I've always been really into celebrating that and pointing it out because it's an accomplishment, especially like now, but especially like 2 decades ago, Kim Gordon, like, L7, these Sleater-Kinney, when it was just, you had to push through so much more resistance in the scene and inner resistance, all the inner voices telling you like, oh, girls don't play in bands, or you're supposed to do this with your life, and you're suddenly going in this direction, Bikini Kill too.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole Riot Grrrl movement too was like very much came out of that kind of DIY ethos too, right? Where, if you look back to the like let's go way back to like the girl groups of the 60s. That was not a DIY thing. These were talented musicians who were basically groomed and exploited by the record industry.
Yeah.
Right. You hear these horrible stories about like how Tina Turner was like both abused and exploited by her husband.
Yeah.
And they were paid almost nothing. And they created some incredible music, but they were not really compensated for it or really respected as musicians, even, let alone respected as women. The Riot Grrrl movement, I feel like, really, helped to sort of attach the DIY ethos to, music and let, everybody, you can do it yourself. Women, men, anybody can do this themselves. And so that, I think you're spot on there. Like, that was a really important time,
Yeah.
Exactly. The Breeders, Bikini Kill, L7, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's.
I always feel bad like listing off a litany because I'm like, who did I forget? I should have like listed them all, but I can't list them.
Right. Yeah, I know. There's so many. There were
so many.
Yeah, there really were.
Yeah. Let's just switch gears really briefly. I kind of want to talk about a little bit about your new project and kind of where, because you and I haven't had a chance to really talk much about it before. I just wanted to talk about how did that come to be, and what's your vision for that, and where do you think it's going?
So I kind of wanted to go in a different direction during the last year of SubRosa, and I wanted to focus more on solo music. And because SubRosa kept getting so many opportunities, which is great, it's a great problem to have, but I was struggling to find the time to really focus on it. So I basically ended SubRosa so that I could focus on the keening. And I really felt like I wanted to go in that new direction. And I just wanted to make music that was a little more, explore like a more minimal, stripped down, almost folk driven music. So I started writing the music shortly after SubRosa ended, but hit some roadblocks and just setbacks, like internal and external. And just, it took a long time to like really finalize the songwriting and everything. So The first album was coming out on October 6th, and the second album is almost done. But
Oh, wow.
yeah, but it's like in the final mixing stages. First, we're going to put out this album, and then we'll revisit the second album.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's just been so exciting and amazing to work with Billy Anderson and Nate Carson and Andrea Morgan. They're like the kind of the core of the band over the last 2 years that have been with me through both the recordings of the album. Nate, I reached out to him about recording the album here in Portland, and he set up everything. He reached out to the session musicians to help to come in and record their parts. He helped me nail down a studio. We talked about different different options, and decided on Hallowed Halls and Billy Anderson. And that's how I met Billy Anderson, was through Nate. I mean, Nate really got the ball rolling, and then Billy just kind of kept it going and snowballed it. And then, yeah, and luckily they want to be part of the live band, and we're playing our first shows in 2 weeks, and everything is just kind of going smoothly and falling into place and feeling really good. And it's been amazing to, work with them. And it's been very scary at times to think about performing again.
Has it been a little while since you performed?
Yeah, I haven't performed in front of people publicly since 2017 when SubRosa ended.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it has been a while.
Yeah, it's been like 5 years or 6 years since I performed live in front of people.
Well, that's exciting, though.
Yeah, it's exciting. There was a time when I didn't know if I would come back to music or make music again.
Well, any closing thoughts? Anything else that you've been thinking about while we've been talking that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, just thank you so much for the podcast, and thanks so much for doing this. And I think you're getting a really cool, interesting perspective from these musicians and other people in the metal scene that people haven't heard before, and it's very exciting to talk about origins. And, I'm reliving these moments with you. And so I can see that you get tapped into a part of people that people don't see normally. Like you get tapped into a part of their story or their enthusiasm or passion for music that you don't see in a typical or regular interview where you're talking about an album release or something. So yeah, I think this is going to be really cool.
Well,
Brian.
thanks. I appreciate it. I have one final question that I ask everybody that's just sort of a fun, like, throwaway question.
Yeah.
But it's a hypothetical. So the question is this: if you could have dinner with any metal musician, living or dead, who would it be?
Oh my gosh. Well, he's not exactly a metal musician, but kind of metal adjacent or heavy, dark, I guess. It would be Trent Reznor for sure. Like, I love Nine Inch Nails.
Wow, that's a great answer. Now, what would you do? What would you guys discuss? What would you want to ask Trent at dinner?
I kind of know a little bit about what drew him into music, but I'd want to know more. I'd want to ask him a lot of similar questions that you're asking me. I'd want to know, like, how did it start? How did you get started on this path that took you to this place where no one has ever been, and making music that no one's ever made? And what was it inside you? And when did that took you in that direction? And when was it that you started hearing that voice inside you that's saying, we're going to go do this?
Yeah.
And I have this in my mind for this kind of music. And you listened to all the same kinds of music everyone else did. Why did you make music that was so different? I mean, a lot of people in the goth scene and industrial scene don't like Nine Inch Nails because they took industrial to the mainstream. And I get it, but he also made it something different and something new and beautiful that had never been done before, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'll add him to my list. I would love to interview him at some point. Well,
my gosh.
Maybe I'll get to that level at some point, but I'm gonna have to walk before I run there. But anyway, Rebecca, thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. I've really enjoyed every minute of this. This has been really fun. So thank you.
Thank you. It's been great. Thank you.
I'm really struck by how conscious Rebecca has been about her status as a role model for young women in metal. I think about this a lot as the father of a young woman who is herself a musician, and I guess I just feel like I'm so glad that there are women like Rebecca out there for our daughters to look up to. that they can be courageous like Rebecca has been, that they can make their music, that they need not be pressured to look a certain way or dress a certain way just because the men in the industry want them to. In this sense, Rebecca is not only a role model, but she's one of the women who has helped to chart new pathways. Many other women have done this, but Rebecca is one of them. And for that alone, not only for her deeply powerful music, Rebecca will always have my respect and support. I'm honored to have gotten to know her over the past year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing her again when the Keening comes through town on their North American tour with Paul Bearer in just a few weeks. As I mentioned in the intro, I've put a link to that tour in the show notes, so you can go check it out and get tickets. This was the final episode of Season 1. Be sure to watch your notifications where you're listening to this podcast, and be sure to subscribe, because I have a couple of bonus episodes planned to help tide you over until Season 2 is ready to go. I'm super stoked for what Season 2 has in store for you, and I look forward to it, but realistically, it's going to be a few months while I get all of that work done. This project is a labor of love. I'm not getting paid for this, but I'm committed to producing a high-quality podcast, and I hope I've been able to deliver that to you, and I also hope to do this for the foreseeable future. I really appreciate all the support and encouragement I've gotten along the way. It just means a lot. So Season 2 is taking shape, and I've booked a few interviews for it already, but in all honesty, it's going to be a few months before Season 2 is ready to go. So I'll be back, though. Don't worry. Now that the first season is over, and I've had a little opportunity to exhale, I wanted to thank a few people specifically. First of all, thanks to Joe Gersh for your friendship all these years, and for helping to inspire and shape the idea for this show, and for being there to refine my thinking along the way and indulging my crazy ideas. Thanks to Joseph Schaefer, Leah Solomon, and all of the amazing people at Northwest Terrorfest in Seattle for once again putting on a truly world-class event, and for providing me with such an awesome opportunity to generate some more awareness about this podcast. I talked to a lot of people last weekend when I was at the show and at the festival, and it's been just a tremendous opportunity. So thank you to Terrorfest again. And, of course, thanks to all the other guests on the show this season. Andrea Morgan, Charlie Anderson, CJ Yakub, Jeff Bramus, Cacophonix, Matt Jacobson, Matt Johnston, and Rebecca Vernon. Thank you all. This podcast is a production of Studio Portcullis. Our theme music is by Tauntaun. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell your friends, too. If you enjoy this show, please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps others to find the show. If you have comments or questions or suggestions for guests you'd like to see on the show, please email them to me at metalgatewaypodcast@gmail.com, or you can send me a DM on Instagram @middlegateway. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'll talk to you on Season 2.